It began with a sound that didn't belong in the skies of southern England, a piercing metallic howl that turned every head on the flight line. Pilots looked up from their coffee, mechanics froze mid-motion, and even the wind seemed to hesitate as the strange Spitfire came into view, its nose glinting with the impossible shimmer of two contra-rotating propellers slicing through the morning mist. At first it looked wrong, almost alien, a beloved fighter twisted by someone's reckless idea, and yet as it streaked overhead at a speed that made the earth tremble, disbelief shifted to awe. That mad engineer, they whispered, had done something no one dared attempt. He had forced the elegant Spitfire, Britain's graceful defender, into an experiment of raw power and mechanical chaos, hoping to tear away every limit that air and metal imposed. No one thought it would work. Even the design board had called it foolish, dangerous, a waste of precious wartime materials. But when the modified prototype took off that morning, its twin-prop roar echoing like thunder across the cliffs, the air itself seemed to split in two, and from that instant, every pilot watching knew they were witnessing either the most brilliant leap in aviation or a fatal mistake written in smoke. The test pilot's hands gripped the trembling controls, sweat pooling inside his gloves as the aircraft clawed for altitude, the engines pulling in opposite directions, each revolution threatening to tear the airframe apart. Below, the engineer who had designed it, a quiet, stubborn man who believed symmetry could rewrite speed, stood motionless, eyes fixed on the blur overhead, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But instead came a surge of acceleration so violent that it punched through the clouds and left behind a single streak of vapor brighter than any contrail seen before. In that instant, the impossible happened. The Spitfire, reborn through madness and genius, broke past 470 miles per hour, its twin propellers slicing the very resistance that had once chained it, and the war's most graceful fighter became its fastest legend. The moment the Spitfire broke through the cloud layer, the cockpit became a furnace of noise and vibration. Every rivet in the fuselage seemed to hum with defiance, and the twin propellers clawed at the sky with a rhythm that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The test pilot, Squadron Leader John Hawkeye Carson, felt the stick tremble under his gloves as if the aircraft itself was alive, testing him, daring him to lose control. Below, on the grass airfield, the small group of engineers and officers watched the radar screens flicker. The speed needle kept climbing, faster than any Spitfire had ever gone. The readings were unbelievable. 460. 470. The control tower crackled with static, voices overlapping in disbelief. In a war where every ounce of advantage meant lives, what they were witnessing felt like witchcraft. Yet inside the cockpit, Carson was fighting for his life. The twin props created torque forces that twisted the aircraft in opposite directions. The airframe buckled, and the control surfaces groaned as he pushed the throttle a fraction further. He could smell the oil heating in the lines, could feel the pedals kicking back against his boots. His jaw clenched as he fought the urge to pull out too soon. One wrong correction, and the two propeller streams would cross each other's wake, shredding lift entirely. "Hold together, girl," he muttered through his oxygen mask. The gauges danced like frantic insects. Altimeter, 5,000, 7,000. The engine temperature needle crept into the red, but Carson kept her climbing. Below, the chief engineer, Edward Halley, the man the newspapers had already mocked as the mad prop, stood motionless, coat snapping in the wind, eyes never leaving the sky. For months, he had defended this design in front of skeptical officers who called it a death trap. He had been told that contra-rotation was an engineer's fantasy, that the added complexity would destroy reliability in combat. Yet Halley had seen what few others did, a way to cancel torque, to pour the full power of the new Merlin engine straight into thrust. If he could make the system balance, the Spitfire could fly faster than anything the Germans had. But there was no guarantee that balance could ever be achieved in the real world. Up in the clouds, Carson discovered why. Each small gust of wind threw the propeller slipstreams out of phase, shaking the plane as though it were a toy in a storm. The canopy rattled. Loose bolts in the fuselage sang. He felt his vision tunnel, the vibration traveling through his spine until every heartbeat synced with the screaming engine. For a terrifying second, the right prop lost synchronization and the whole nose lurched sideways. The horizon spun. The G-forces slammed him into the harness. Alarms blared. He fought the stick, leveling the wings with a grunt that tore through his throat. Then, silence. The props found rhythm again. The Spitfire stabilized, steady as a dart. In that fragile stillness, he saw the speed indicator quivering at a number that had only existed in dreams. 470 miles per hour. He allowed himself one breath of awe. Down below, Halley felt his knees weaken. Against all logic, his mad machine was flying truer than any model predicted. Around him, officers began to cheer, but Halley remained still, knowing the true test was not speed, it was endurance. Could the airframe survive a sustained run? Could the pilot bring her back in one piece? The question hung heavy over the field as the silver shape carved across the sunlight like a blade of light. The sound of twin propellers merging into a single unearthly howl that echoed over the cliffs. The moment the Spitfire broke through the cloud layer, the cockpit became a furnace of noise and vibration. Every rivet in the fuselage seemed to hum with defiance, and the twin propellers clawed at the sky with a rhythm that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The test pilot, Squadron Leader John Hawkeye Carson, felt the stick tremble under his gloves as if the aircraft itself was alive, testing him, daring him to lose control. Below, on the grass airfield, the small group of engineers and officers watched the radar screens flicker. The speed needle kept climbing, faster than any Spitfire had ever gone. The readings were unbelievable. 460. 470. The control tower crackled with static, voices overlapping in disbelief. In a war where every ounce of advantage meant lives, what they were witnessing felt like witchcraft. Yet inside the cockpit, Carson was fighting for his life. The twin props created torque forces that twisted the aircraft in opposite directions. The airframe buckled, and the control surfaces groaned as he pushed the throttle a fraction further. He could smell the oil heating in the lines, could feel the pedals kicking back against his boots. His jaw clenched as he fought the urge to pull out too soon. One wrong correction, and the two propeller streams would cross each other's wake, shredding lift entirely. "Hold together, girl," he muttered through his oxygen mask. The gauges danced like frantic insects. Altimeter, 5,000, 7,000. The engine temperature needle crept into the red, but Carson kept her climbing. Below, the chief engineer, Edward Halley, the man the newspapers had already mocked as the mad prop, stood motionless, coat snapping in the wind, eyes never leaving the sky. For months, he had defended this design in front of skeptical officers who called it a death trap. He had been told that contra-rotation was an engineer's fantasy, that the added complexity would destroy reliability in combat. Yet Halley had seen what few others did, a way to cancel torque, to pour the full power of the new Merlin engine straight into thrust. If he could make the system balance, the Spitfire could fly faster than anything the Germans had. But there was no guarantee that balance could ever be achieved in the real world. Up in the clouds, Carson discovered why. Each small gust of wind threw the propeller slipstreams out of phase, shaking the plane as though it were a toy in a storm. The canopy rattled. Loose bolts in the fuselage sang. He felt his vision tunnel, the vibration traveling through his spine until every heartbeat synced with the screaming engine. For a terrifying second, the right prop lost synchronization and the whole nose lurched sideways. The horizon spun. The G-forces slammed him into the harness. Alarms blared. He fought the stick, leveling the wings with a grunt that tore through his throat. Then, silence. The props found rhythm again. The Spitfire stabilized, steady as a dart. In that fragile stillness, he saw the speed indicator quivering at a number that had only existed in dreams. 470 miles per hour. He allowed himself one breath of awe. Down below, Halley felt his knees weaken. Against all logic, his mad machine was flying truer than any model predicted. Around him, officers began to cheer, but Halley remained still, knowing the true test was not speed, it was endurance. Could the airframe survive a sustained run? Could the pilot bring her back in one piece? The question hung heavy over the field as the silver shape carved across the sunlight like a blade of light. the sound of twin propellers merging into a single unearthly howl that echoed over the cliffs. The descent began with a violent tug at the controls as the Spitfire's nose pitched down, slicing through turbulent air like a blade. Every gust, every eddy of wind threatened to throw the twin props out of phase, and Carson's hands ached from gripping the stick. The vibrations traveling up his arms into his shoulders, a relentless reminder that this aircraft was a razor's edge between genius and disaster. Below, the airfield appeared impossibly small, a mere patch of green and gray, dotted with frantic engineers and crew. The windscreen trembled under the stress, glass straining against the forces of acceleration and torque, and the Merlin engines screamed in defiance as Carson fed them precise adjustments, coaxing the plane into a delicate glide. Every second stretched into an eternity. He could feel the plane wanting to twist, wanting to rebel, but the twin-prop system, Halley's mad solution, absorbed and canceled the conflicting torques with astonishing efficiency. It was as if the plane was aware, instinctively balancing itself against the forces that would have destroyed a conventional Spitfire. Carson's vision tunneled, focusing solely on the horizon line and the runway, calculating in his mind the exact moment to deploy flaps, the angle of attack, the subtle corrections needed to prevent the wingtip from flexing beyond safe limits. Below, the chief engineer's eyes never left the Spitfire. He could see the subtle adjustments, the minute deflections in the fuselage, and everyone was proof that his radical design had a chance. The plane's shadow raced across the runway, growing larger with every heartbeat, and the engines roared as the wheels kissed the steel mats of the landing strip, sending shudders up through the aircraft. For a split second, the landing seemed unstable, the left wheel barely touching the mat before lifting again. But Carson corrected instantly. Torque balanced, holding the plane straight with micro-adjustments that tested every ounce of his strength and nerve. The engines thundered, propellers slicing the air like twin whips, yet the Spitfire stayed alive, obedient to the pilot's will. Sweat streamed down Carson's face as he throttled back gradually, watching the runway stretch beneath him, every mat bearing the immense weight of speed, torque, and human survival. Below, engineers and ground crew held their breath until the final brakes locked and the aircraft shuddered to a stop, its nose pointing straight down the center of the field, flawless in its execution. Silence fell over the airfield for a single suspended heartbeat. Then, slowly, applause and cheers erupted. Carson exhaled like he had been holding the world in his lungs, and Halley allowed himself the first smile in hours. The Spitfire had survived, perfectly balanced, faster than any conventional design, and it carried in its gleaming airframe the proof that ingenuity, audacity, and relentless calculation could overcome fear, skepticism, and the very limits of engineering. News would spread quickly. The papers would call it a miracle. But those who were there understood. This was science, math, courage, and human will intertwined. The twin-prop Spitfire had not merely flown, it had transcended, becoming legend in a single, terrifying, beautiful flight that would rewrite what pilots thought possible. And in that quiet aftermath, standing in the shadow of the aircraft and listening to the echo of its engines settling, everyone present felt the weight of history, knowing that they had witnessed the birth of a fighter that could dominate the skies in ways that had once existed only in imagination. As the adrenaline faded and Carson climbed down from the cockpit, every muscle aching and nerve still humming with tension, the reality of what had just occurred began to settle in, not just for him but for everyone on the airfield. Engineers rushed forward, measuring the wings, checking the fuselage, inspecting the props for stress or microfractures, yet the plane remained immaculate, each component performing in perfect harmony under forces that had been previously unimaginable. Halley moved among them, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a restrained excitement, eyes scanning the aircraft for evidence of failure, but finding none. He ran his hands along the smooth metal, feeling the vibrations still lingering from the flight, the energy that had traveled through every rivet and beam. This was more than a test. It was a validation of months of calculations, simulations, and arguments, and the Spitfire had exceeded every expectation. Ground crews marveled silently at the twin props, their blades still spinning gently in the settling wind, reflecting the early morning sun like twin mirrors of precision. They had doubted, feared, and worried, yet here it was, the impossible realized. Carson leaned back against the fuselage, breathing heavily, and allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had felt the torque trying to twist him out of the sky, had fought the sheer power of two Merlin engines demanding control, and had survived not because of luck, but because the aircraft responded exactly as Halley had designed it. The twin-prop system balancing, compensating, and amplifying power in a way that a single propeller could never achieve. News of the flight would ripple through the RAF immediately. Engineers in distant hangars would replay the data, pilots would compare notes, and commanders would understand the tactical implications. A Spitfire that could accelerate faster, climb higher, and maintain control at speeds previously thought impossible. Every skeptic, every critic who had called the design reckless, foolish, or insane now faced evidence so stark it could not be ignored. And as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the airfield, Carson watched other pilots preparing to attempt their own flights, some with hesitation, others with eagerness, each realizing that they were now part of a living experiment, a flight-tested leap into a new era of aerial combat. For Halley, the flight represented vindication and a promise. The twin-prop Spitfire was not merely an experimental prototype, it was the foundation of a revolution, a machine that could redefine dogfights, intercept enemy bombers with unprecedented speed, and allow pilots to push beyond the boundaries of human and mechanical endurance. And in that quiet moment, standing on the tarmac, surrounded by exhausted yet exhilarated men, Halley understood that history had been made. The day the mad engineer turned imagination into reality, courage into proof, and a controversial idea into a legendary fighter capable of soaring beyond every expectation. Even after the first successful landing, the test flight was far from over. Carson returned to the cockpit for a second sortie, this time pushing the aircraft deliberately harder, testing the boundaries of acceleration, maneuverability, and structural endurance. The twin props screamed in unison as he throttled forward, and immediately he could feel the subtle differences that set this Spitfire apart from its single-prop predecessors. The torque that once threatened to twist the nose violently now canceled almost perfectly, leaving the plane with a balance that felt unnatural, as if it were defying physics itself. He climbed rapidly, the altimeter spinning past 5,000, 6,000, and he pressed the throttle to a limit that would have shredded a conventional fighter. The airframe vibrated under the immense stress, metal groaning softly. But the aircraft held, each component harmonizing in a symphony of precision and daring. Carson could feel every nuance of flight, the subtle airflow over the wings, the turbulence from his own prop wash, the pressure fluctuations in the fuselage. In this extreme environment, pilot instinct merged with machine intelligence. Every micro-adjustment in the stick and rudder had to be perfect, executed in milliseconds, or the twin-prop system would fight back. Yet as he pushed toward 470 miles per hour, the Spitfire responded like a living organism, each propeller rotation a pulse, each vibration a heartbeat confirming that Halley's genius was real. At times, the forces became almost unbearable. G-forces pinned him into the seat, blood rushing in his ears, vision narrowing, yet he continued, aware that the aircraft's fate rested in his hands as much as his own. Through the canopy, the horizon blurred, the ground a quilt of green and brown, and he realized the significance of what he was doing. This was not merely testing speed, it was proving that the Spitfire could dominate the skies in ways previously unimaginable, that a single idea, dismissed as reckless, could rewrite the tactical doctrine of aerial combat. Below, Halley and the engineers monitored the telemetry, reading stress points, temperature spikes, RPM synchronizations, and torque balance with the intensity of men defusing a bomb. Every reading told a story of controlled chaos, of a machine performing beyond reason, yet within the constraints of human calculation. The second landing was even more harrowing than the first. Carson descended through turbulent layers, adjusting propeller pitch to compensate for wind shear, trimming the wings against micro-twists, and feeling the aircraft flex under enormous load. The landing gear kissed the runway with just enough pressure to absorb the momentum, tires screeching against the tarmac, yet the aircraft remained intact. As he rolled to a stop, sweat and adrenaline coating him, he realized the profound truth. This was more than a prototype. The twin-prop Spitfire had become a legend in motion, a machine that married audacity with physics, fear with precision, chaos with control, and imagination with reality. And as engineers and ground crews celebrated, the historic implications were undeniable. In the coming battles, speed, climb, and maneuverability would be redefined, all because one engineer refused to accept conventional limits, and one pilot dared to trust in genius. As Carson climbed once more into the open sky, the wind ripped past the canopy with a force that seemed intent on tearing the aircraft apart. But the twin-prop Spitfire, now fully alive under his hands, responded with a precision that bordered on miraculous. Each propeller spun in perfect counterphase, slicing the air cleanly, the torque that would have twisted a normal fighter now entirely neutralized, leaving Carson to feel as if he were piloting a sword of steel and lightning. The climb rate defied all prior calculations, the altimeter spinning faster than any engineer had dared predict, while the airframe, though creaking under the immense stress, remained obedient. Each vibration, each shudder, was a whisper of the machine testing his nerve, a constant reminder that at any second the balance could collapse and throw him into the clouds as debris. Sweat burned his eyes, adrenaline pumped furiously, and yet he pressed onward, trusting in Halley's radical design. He performed steep turns at speeds that had once been lethal, the G-forces pinning him mercilessly, yet the aircraft held, flexing and twisting, wings absorbing turbulence like living bones. The roar of the twin engines filled the cockpit, drowning every other sound, merging into a terrifying symphony of raw power and controlled chaos. Carson could feel every micro-correction, every pulse of torque transmitted through the stick, and he realized that the aircraft itself seemed aware of its purpose, instinctively balancing the fury of two massive propellers into a coherent thrust. Down below, the ground crew and engineers monitored telemetry readings in awe. RPM fluctuations that should have caused catastrophic failure were absorbed flawlessly. Structural stresses that seemed impossible on paper were distributed evenly, and every measurement confirmed what Carson already knew through instinct. The Spitfire had become more than a plane. It had become a living weapon, an embodiment of audacious human ingenuity. As he pushed toward the final simulated combat maneuver, banking steeply to the left and accelerating into a dive, the horizon became a blur of cloud and sunlight, the wind screaming past like an elemental force, and for the briefest moment, Carson felt the terrifying exhilaration of flying something alive, something that could not simply be measured in numbers or tested in a laboratory. Every second stretched infinitely as he fought to keep the aircraft aligned, torque balanced and structural integrity intact, knowing that this flight would decide not only the fate of the prototype, but the credibility of Halley's revolutionary twin-prop design. With a final surge, he pulled back on the stick, leveling the aircraft just as the airfield came into view below, wheels descending toward the runway like a bullet guided by instinct and trust. The landing was a violent, breathtaking ballet. The left wing flexed slightly, the right prop sliced through wind gusts, and the plane shuddered as tires kissed the tarmac. Carson's hands burned from the strain. His heart raced with triumph and fear, and when the aircraft finally rolled to a stop, perfect and intact, a stunned silence hung over the airfield. Then came the eruption of cheers. Engineers leapt into the air, mechanics clapped and shouted, and Halley allowed himself a rare, unguarded smile. The Spitfire, through sheer audacity, physics, and human courage, had defied every expectation. It had survived extreme testing, reached speeds no one thought possible, and demonstrated a capability that would change aerial combat forever. In that moment, everyone knew history had been made, not by luck, but by the relentless combination of genius, bravery, and unwavering trust between man and machine. And the legend of the twin-prop Spitfire began in a sky filled with the roar of engines, the tension of impossible calculations, and the awe of those who had witnessed its birth. As Carson brought the Spitfire to a complete stop, the engines winding down, the wind carrying away the residual roar of twin propellers, a profound silence fell over the airfield, the kind that only comes after witnessing something impossible made real. A silence that allowed every engineer, pilot, and observer to feel the weight of what they had just seen. The culmination of months of debate, calculations, and near insanity all manifest in one gleaming airframe that defied convention, expectation, and the very limits of human understanding. Halley, the quiet, stubborn genius whose mad idea had been derided, now stood at the edge of the runway, shoulders tense, hands trembling slightly, watching as Carson eased the canopy open, and in that instant, it became undeniable that they had not simply flown a prototype, but had rewritten the possibilities of aerial combat forever. For this twin-prop Spitfire had proven that speed, balance, and control could coexist in a way previously dismissed as fantasy, that the aircraft could climb faster, maneuver tighter, and accelerate harder than any fighter ever built, and that pilots could now rely on a machine that was not merely a tool of war, but a partner. A creation born of audacity, calculation, and the audacious courage to defy conventional limits. As Carson stepped down, sweat and adrenaline still coating his face, the engineers rushed forward, checking every rivet, every propeller pitch, every stress mark, yet finding nothing out of alignment, nothing broken, only evidence of perfection achieved under extreme conditions. And as Halley ran his hands along the fuselage, feeling the residual vibrations that had once threatened to destroy it, he realized that the genius of the design was not in theory but in practice, that the twin-prop configuration had transformed the Spitfire from a remarkable fighter into a legend capable of redefining dogfights, intercepts, and tactical superiority, and that this single flight, witnessed by a handful of men and now destined to ripple through the RAF, was proof that human imagination, when paired with courage, precision, and relentless determination, could overcome skepticism, fear, and even the laws of conventional engineering, leaving behind not just an aircraft, but a symbol of ingenuity that would inspire pilots, engineers, and strategists for decades to come, a living testament to the moment when audacity became reality. When a mad idea took flight and forever altered the skies of war, leaving behind a legacy of speed, mastery, and legend that no enemy, no challenge, and no doubt could ever erase. After the first historic flight had stunned everyone on the airfield, Carson climbed back into the cockpit for the second sortie, knowing that the real test of Halley's twin-prop innovation was not speed alone, but endurance, maneuverability, and the ability to survive conditions no conventional Spitfire had ever faced. The engines roared to life, twin propellers spinning in perfect, terrifying harmony, sending a vibration through the fuselage that felt alive, almost sentient, and as he throttled forward, the aircraft leapt into the sky with a force that pinned him to the seat, G-forces pressing him into the harness like molten metal, while below, the engineers watched every gauge with nerves straining, their hearts synchronized with every pulse of the Merlin engines, knowing that one miscalculation could destroy both machine and pilot in an instant. The Spitfire accelerated rapidly, slicing through clouds with a howl of metal and wind, and Carson was forced to make micro-corrections in real time, adjusting rudder, ailerons, and propeller pitch as if conducting a symphony in which a single wrong note could collapse the entire structure, all the while feeling the torque fight against him in bursts and then suddenly neutralize perfectly, confirming Halley's audacious calculations. The climb was violent, the aircraft twisting under aerodynamic pressure, wings flexing dangerously, yet it responded with an almost eerie obedience, proving that a careful balance of counter-rotation could produce both power and control beyond conventional comprehension. For hours, he pushed the Spitfire through simulated combat maneuvers, steep dives, sharp banks, rapid climbs, testing structural limits and pilot endurance simultaneously, the twin-prop system absorbing forces, stabilizing, and accelerating with precision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had dismissed the concept as madness. Every vibration, every shudder became a pulse of information, and Carson adapted instinctively, merging human reflex with mechanical genius, feeling that the plane had become an extension of his own body. Each turn, each surge, a negotiation between man and machine. A negotiation that Halley had envisioned, but no one had believed possible. Below, telemetry confirmed the extraordinary. RPM fluctuations perfectly synchronized. Torque completely neutralized. Stress readings within tolerances that engineers had thought unachievable. And as the flight neared its climax, Carson executed a steep dive followed by a full-throttle vertical climb, pushing the Spitfire into velocities and maneuvers that no pilot had ever dared. Yet each adjustment, each millisecond of decision-making, proved that the twin-prop design was not only revolutionary but reliable. And when finally the aircraft leveled out and approached the runway for a landing that demanded absolute precision, every observer understood that they had witnessed something transcendent. A fighter that combined audacity, genius, and human courage into a single form, rewriting the boundaries of aerial combat and ensuring that this second flight would cement the twin-prop Spitfire not merely as a record-breaker, but as a symbol of what imagination, calculation, and relentless determination could achieve when fear was faced head-on, skepticism overturned, and physics challenged without compromise, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire pilots and engineers for decades to come, proving definitively that Halley's mad idea had transformed an already remarkable fighter into a legend capable of dominating the skies in ways the world had never imagined.